The stars had forgotten humanity. It had been 3 centuries since the last exodus, when Earth fell silent and the great fleets vanished beyond the fringe systems. They called it extinction, a mercy in the eyes of the galactic elite. The federated core worlds, smug in their unity, marked the date as Liberation Day, free at last from the unpredictable savagery of humans. Their mistake wasn't thinking we were gone. It was forgetting why they feared us in the first place. Somewhere at the edge of explored space, in the dead zone of Echelon Prime, a single warship powered up after 312 years of silence. The Icarus Vow, last of the Aegis-class dreadnoughts, came alive with a groan of awakening AI cores and resynced cryo chambers. The systems flared red first, then steady white. The engine bays, dormant and coated in the frost of deep space, glowed faintly as fusion reactors purred back to life. A heartbeat. Inside the command deck, Captain Kyle stirred. He wasn't a man anymore, not fully. Cryo-deep and altered with time-slowing nanites, his aging had halted before the war even ended. His bones had been rebuilt twice. His eyes had seen too much. Wars, betrayals, and the fall of everything he believed in. But as the stasis fluid drained and he stepped out onto the metal floor, one thought pierced through the haze. "We're not done," he whispered, voice hoarse. The ship didn't answer. It didn't need to. Crew began waking, men bred for battle, enhanced and hardened. No diplomats, no pacifists, just warriors. Each one had volunteered to sleep for centuries, waiting for the signal. That signal never came. So they waited. The AI had strict orders. Wake them only if humanity had a chance to return. Now, something had changed. Kyle stood at the command screen, watching a flood of intercepted transmissions. Alien chatter. Core world arrogance. And one phrase repeated in every language. Humanity is extinct. He smiled bitterly. We're going to teach them what extinction really looks like. The core worlds had moved on. They'd turned Earth into a quarantined relic. Ruined cities, stripped for tech. Monuments, vandalized or replaced. Human DNA was outlawed. Our culture burned in digital purges. Our name spoken only in fear or disgust. And all of it, every insult, was documented. The AI had been recording for 300 years. Now Icarus Vow moved. It wasn't stealthy. It didn't hide. It roared. Thrusters blazed like the fury of a forgotten god. Every system powered to maximum, and the comms channel lit up. A single message, broadcast in ancient Terran: "We are not dead. We are not forgotten. We are coming." The response was immediate. Panicked messages across sectors, military alerts, a bounty posted for the warship. But none of it mattered. Kyle walked past the cryopods, watching as his brothers rose. Men like Richter, eyes colder than space itself. Men like Dry, who'd once planted nukes in alien capital cities and smiled doing it. These weren't heroes. They weren't here for peace. They were the hammer of a dead empire, returned to break the spine of a galaxy that had mocked their silence. Kale knew their mission. Not peace, not diplomacy, retribution, and Earth. Earth would rise again, but not as a beacon, as a warning. "Prep weapons," he ordered. "First target, the Grell trade nexus." It was symbolic. The Grell had been the first to call for humanity's purge. Their ambassador had laughed during the vote. Kyle still remembered that grin. The AI's voice came online, deep, ancient, metallic. "Trajectory locked. Weapon systems at full capacity." Kyle sat in the captain's chair, gripping the armrest. "Burn it," he said. And so they did. The Grell trade nexus burned for 7 days. It started as a pinpoint strike, one beam of condensed fusion that tore through the heart of the orbital ring. The station's shielding, built for minor pirate resistance and stray asteroids, folded in seconds under the sheer pressure of ancient Terran war tech. Whole sectors depressurized instantly. Thousands died before they knew what hit them. Kyle watched from the viewing deck, arms crossed behind his back, unmoved. This wasn't murder. It was the first note in a symphony of retribution. For every child torn from their family in the purge, for every desecrated monument on Earth, for every whisper that humanity had been an error. This was only the beginning. The crew watched, too. Some in silence, some with half smiles that never reached their eyes. They weren't heartless. They were tired of being erased. Casualty estimates? Kyle asked, not out of guilt, but calculation. 250,000 dead or missing, the AI replied. Infrastructure collapse confirmed. Planetside panic riots spreading. Grell military scrambling reinforcement fleets. Let them come, Coyle murmured. We've got 3 centuries of war stored in these walls. The command center thrummed with life. The men were older in memory than in body. They moved with the precision of veterans, voices clipped and movements clean. Richter sat at the tactical station, scanning incoming fleet data. Dre, now coordinating supply rations and armory resupply, muttered to himself as he inventoried explosive yields. He hadn't spoken to anyone about his dreams since waking up, but the anger was leaking out of him in short, tight bursts. Icarus Vow had never been a flagship. It wasn't the pride of the fleet. It was a failsafe, designed for exile, built for vengeance. Its very existence had been classified even within Terran command circles. When Earth fell, they launched it into the void. Crew in cryo, AI on passive watch, orders sealed. And now it had awakened with a single directive: make the galaxy remember. The next move was political, always cut the tongue before the brain. Without communication, the core worlds would splinter into paranoia and blame. We target the relay arch next, Kale said. The one over Theta Prime, that's their biggest voice. Civilian population in proximity exceeds... Kyle raised a hand. I didn't ask. The AI paused, then acknowledged with silence. It understood now. This wasn't about strategy. It was about message, about forcing the galaxy to feel what it had so confidently inflicted. 3 jumps later, Icarus Vow appeared in Theta Prime's orbit. The planet was serene. Twin moons, blue oceans, spires of marble white. The kind of place Earth might have become if history had gone a little differently, if betrayal hadn't paved the road to extinction. Kyle stared at it. He wasn't numb, he wasn't a monster, but his heart had been torn from his chest the moment Earth went dark, when the alliances humanity had bled for turned their backs. He remembered the last broadcast from Terra, his sister's voice, whispering into static. They're not here to negotiate, Kyle. They're burning us. She died screaming. Kyle blinked the memory away and turned to Richter. Prep the pulse cannon. Center mass. Richter didn't hesitate. Powering now. Send them a warning first, Kale added, his voice like gravel. Let them know it's us. On every screen, every station, every neural link feed on Theta Prime, a single image flashed, the sigil of the Terran Imperium. Dead 3 centuries, now roaring back to life in blood-red flame. Beneath it, the words, "You erased us. Now we erase you." The Arch never fired a shot. Its shields activated, its sentries deployed, but nothing could stop what was coming. The pulse cannon fired in a wave that tore through the construct like paper. The sky turned black, the spire shattered into flaming rain, the sea boiled under falling debris. The AI reported 10 million signal disruptions. The planetary net offline. Their voice silenced, and still Kale felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Good, he said. Dry leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Feels too easy. It's not meant to be hard. Kale replied. Not yet. They all knew it wouldn't stay easy. The Corps wasn't going to take this lying down. The Grell death toll alone had shocked them. But it wasn't just the destruction. It was who did it. The ghost of humanity. A relic they thought erased. A memory now made flesh again, flying a warship thought buried. And now, they'd made contact. Kyle knew a fleet was coming. Knew it before the AI even confirmed the jump readings. Ships were assembling in the Vallon system. Thousands of them. Mixed-race armadas, battle-hardened and well-equipped. Old enemies, now united in terror at the return of a single Terran vessel. They'll come with numbers, Richter said, staring at the display. Hundreds to one. We'll make it cost them more than they're willing to pay, Kale answered. Every one of our deaths buys another fear, another hesitation. That's how we win. But can we? Dry asked. Really win? Kyle turned toward him. We already did. We came back. They weren't naive. They didn't believe in survival fantasies. Icarus Vow wasn't here to rebuild humanity. It was here to remind the galaxy of a simple truth, that for every atrocity committed, there is a reckoning, that even ashes can burn again. The War Council assembled that night. No long speeches, no strategy debates, just the raw, open planning of men who'd been bred to break planets. We let them come, Kyle said. We pick our field, Alcran Rift. It's narrow, volatile, hard to navigate. Gives us the edge. We turn the battlefield into a tomb, Richter added. Mine the flanks, seed automated drone pods, cloak kinetic spears in the gravitational eddies. Dry grinned for the first time. Set the wrecks on fire. Let the survivors limp home with stories. That was the goal. Not just death, fear, myth. The AI stitched the plan together. They will arrive in less than 94 hours. Then let's make it count, Kyle said. The men nodded. Later that night, Kyle stood alone in his quarters. A rusted dog tag hung from a steel chain around his neck. His sister's, the one he'd taken before boarding cryo. He still remembered her smile. The way she'd kept faith in humanity, right to the end. She wouldn't have approved of what he was doing. But she hadn't watched their people burned alive, begging for help that never came. She hadn't seen the footage of alien delegates laughing as Earth's surface became molten ash. She hadn't read the textbooks that now described humans as a tragic anomaly. He had, and he would carry that memory to his last breath. He whispered to her, just once, I'm doing this for us. And the warship drifted silently through the dark, a ghost wrapped in fire, heading into the jaws of a galaxy that had dared to forget the fury of man. The Alcran Rift had no allegiance. It was a stretch of space the core worlds had deemed too unstable to patrol, too deadly to colonize. A graveyard of failed mining ops and shattered convoys, riddled with gravitational anomalies and debris storms that shredded even modern shielding. It was chaos made flesh, a perfect battlefield for the last soldiers of Earth. Kyle stood over the holographic projection of the rift, studying it like a surgeon eyeing the first cut. Red lines marked the predicted entry paths of the incoming fleet. Blue arcs represented the kinetic sling traps they'd placed, simple projectiles, accelerated by gravity fields to hypersonic speeds. No heat signatures, no emissions, just death. Dre finished sealing the last of the drone pods into the asteroid field, his voice crackling through the comms. 300 automated spears in place. If they so much as sneeze the wrong way, they'll start bleeding. Reinforce Sector 9, Kale said. It's the likeliest choke point, and bury some charges under the wreck clusters. If they retreat, make sure they regret it. The crew didn't speak much. They were past the need for motivation. This wasn't a battle of ideals. It was vengeance, the kind that calcified into purpose over centuries of betrayal and silence. Richter was busy programming decoys, old hulls, stripped clean and rigged with flares to simulate active power signatures. The idea was simple. Make the enemy shoot shadows and waste their fury before they even got close. Kyle had one final order. Broadcast the message, uncoded. Let them hear it. The AI obeyed. Across dozens of enemy ships, the message blared in raw Terran dialect. This is Captain Kale of the Terran warship Icarus Vow. You who called us extinct. You who spat on our graves. Come, try and finish the job. The silence that followed was the kind born from disbelief. Then, the fleets began to move. First came the Varn, insectoid and cruel, their gunships fast but fragile. Then the Dolaris cruisers, heavy, slow, bristling with weapons. And finally, the core vanguard, a union of former enemies now allied in mutual fear. Human hatred had turned them brothers. Kyle leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Let's make them orphans. The first wave hit like a tidal surge. 20 Varn vessels dove into the rift, scanning aggressively, engines screaming. They ignored the wreckage. Mistake. At Richter's signal, the hidden drone pods activated. Laser pulses flickered, marking targets. Moments later, the kinetic spears flew. Silent, invisible, unstoppable. The lead ship cracked in half. Another spun out. Its wings sheared clean by a rock it never saw. Then the mine clusters detonated. Explosions rippled through space like shockwaves underwater. Fire danced across the rift, consuming engines, crew, and confidence. The survivors pulled back, only to hit the next layer of traps. Kyle's voice was calm. Send the second message. A new transmission screamed through the enemy channels. This is your warning. Leave now or die screaming. The core vanguard didn't retreat. They pressed forward, fury replacing fear. Their commanders thought this was a cornered animal lashing out. They still believed in overwhelming numbers, in doctrine, in superiority. They didn't understand. Coyle didn't fight for victory. He fought to carve trauma into memory. As the enemy closed, Icarus Vow moved. Its engines blazed, cutting an arc through the rift's dead space. The ship danced between debris and gravity wells, maneuvering like something alive. Terran warships were never elegant, but this one moved with precision born of desperation and blood-soaked experience. The main cannon fired once, just once, and a Dolaris cruiser ruptured. It didn't explode. It opened, like a fruit peeled from the inside. Hundreds died without even knowing what killed them. On the bridge, Kyle clenched his fist. Hold line on Quadrant 5. Force them into the spike corridor. Richter redirected fire, herding the enemy into the narrowest part of the rift. That's where Dry had hidden the scorched hull wrecks. On command, the hulls exploded, not with shrapnel, but EMP surges. 5 enemy ships died instantly, dead in the water. Kale didn't gloat. This was mathematics, not sport, but the enemy had numbers. For every ship they lost, 3 more appeared. Some adapted, sending pulse sweeps to find mines. Others used remote detonation to trigger ambushes early. They were learning. Then came the boarding parties. A swarm of small crafts broke formation and charged, kamikaze style. They didn't want to destroy Icarus Vow. They wanted to take it, to prove a point, capture the ghost and display it. Kale's face darkened. Engage internal defense protocols. Kill anything that breathes oxygen. The ship answered with brutality. Narrow corridors sealed. Gatling drones emerged from hidden vaults. Laser turrets popped out from walls and ceilings. When the first boarders breached the lower hangar, they found themselves in a meat grinder. One made it to the hallway. Kyle met him there. The alien, tall, armored, snarling, raised a plasma blade. Kyle raised a slug rifle, fired twice. The alien dropped. Behind Kyle, his men followed in silence. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. This wasn't a war for glory. It was a funeral with no priest, only fire. More boarders came, more blood spilled. The halls of Icarus Vow were painted in the proof that humanity had never needed mercy to survive. On the bridge, the AI reported losses. 17% of drone pods destroyed. Hull breach on deck 6. Reactor holding at 83%. We don't need perfection, Kyle muttered. We just need to leave a scar. The final wave approached. 20 ships in tight formation, cores glowing, heavy weapons armed. They meant to finish it. A surgical strike to carve the Terran ghost from the stars. Kyle knew this was the end of the line, but he had one last move. Overload the core. Prep the Ark protocol. Richter's eyes widened. You sure? Kale nodded. Let them see our heart explode. Let them remember. The Ark protocol was Terran design at its cruelest. A failsafe. If overwhelmed, the warship would become a nuclear star, wiping out everything in a 1,000-mile radius. A final message carved in energy. Dry tapped in the sequence. His hands didn't shake. 10 minutes till overload. Kyle stared at the incoming fleet. He opened a final channel. No encryption, just raw broadcast. You wanted extinction, now you'll feel it. The enemy didn't turn away. Arrogance had made them blind. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The Icarus Vow began to glow from within, like a dying sun. Shields flared, lights died, systems began collapsing by design. Kyle stood in the center of the bridge, alone now. His men had sealed themselves in the pods. If luck favored them, the escape systems might eject far enough. But Kale had no intention of leaving. He was the soul of Earth's vengeance, and souls don't run. The last thing he saw was the enemy ships, scrambling to pull back, engines screaming, and then the warship detonated. The explosion wasn't fire, it was memory turned to energy. The rift screamed. Ships vanished. The space between stars bent under the weight of fury. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy went quiet. But across the surviving worlds, the message remained. Humanity returned, and it did not ask for forgiveness. The Alcran rift burned for weeks, not in the literal sense. Space held no flame. But in data feeds, whispered reports, panicked broadcasts, and the silent screams of sensor logs that showed only blackened wreckage and radiation scars. Thousands dead. Fleets reduced to twisted husks. And at the epicenter, nothing remained but a gaping wound in space where Icarus Vow had made its final statement. The core worlds tried to spin it first. The Dolaris Senate called it a rogue AI incident. The Varn Hive claimed it was a false flag operation. But none of it stuck. There were survivors, pilots whose ships malfunctioned just enough to drift clear before the blast. Commanders who turned back at the edge, too cautious or too smart to follow orders. They came back with stories. Stories of a human warship that moved like a ghost, of mines hidden in asteroid fields that tore ships apart with unholy precision, of drone swarms that fought like devils and corridors that bled fire. But most of all, they came back with one name: Kyle. The core tried to bury it. They failed. The name spread like a virus, infecting backwater systems and fringe colonies. It was whispered in cantinas, etched into cargo hulls, passed between smugglers and exiled soldiers. The Icarus Vow had become myth. A Terran warship long thought dead, now risen to remind the galaxy what it meant to be hunted by men who never surrendered. And Kale? He had become more than a name. He was a warning. Even dead, he had planted a seed no AI purge or Senate decree could erase. But Kale wasn't dead, not entirely. Far from the rift, on the outer edge of an uncharted system, a pod drifted silently through the void, charred, battered, its beacon fried in the overload. Inside, Kale stirred. The AI in the pod flickered to life. Vitals stable. Cryo-induced damage within tolerable limits. Subject, Captain Coyle. Status, alive. His eyes opened slowly, muscles stiff from the force of ejection and the heat that had licked at his skin as the ship died. Pain was instant and honest. Good. It meant he wasn't dreaming. He sat up. The window showed only darkness, no stars, no known coordinates, just the void. Kyle exhaled. Where are we? Drift projection places us approximately 9.4 light-years from Alcran. System not charted, no known civilizations. Kyle's mouth tightened. He remembered everything. The countdown, the overload, the final broadcast. I shouldn't be alive. Correct, the AI said. But the ARC protocol includes ejection parameters calibrated to subspace slings. Luck was a factor. Kyle laughed dryly. It wasn't joy. It was disbelief. Even in death, he'd been denied rest. He checked the pod's systems. Limited food, minimal power. The AI could sustain him, but not forever. Emergency distress beacon? Fried in overload. I recommend minimal movement. We are dark. That may be an advantage. Kyle nodded. The Icarus vow had died the death of legends, and somehow he was still here, floating in the dark. Useless. A man with no ship, no crew, no war. Until the signal came. It was faint, encrypted, Terran frequencies only. Not a core transmission, not a trap. The signature matched one thing only, an old Terran resistance beacon, last used a century before Kyle ever entered cryo. Origin? He asked. The AI processed. Unknown, but it's real. Message fragment attached. Kyle played it. The voice was female, human, young, full of steel. If you're hearing this, then the galaxy knows our name again. If you're Terran, truly Terran, find us. We're not as dead as they think. Kale's blood chilled. Not a distress call, a rallying cry. He leaned back, a flicker of something alien stirring in his chest. Hope, the kind forged in war, born not of dreams, but the refusal to kneel. Where? He demanded. The AI took time. Too long. Signal echoes trace back to Ardent Hollow, fringe planet, supposedly dead since the third collapse. Plot course. You have no engines. Kyle clenched his jaw. Then drift us. 1 inch at a time if we have to. It would take months, maybe years. But it didn't matter. The fire hadn't gone out. Somewhere, humans still breathed, still fought, still remembered, and Kyle would reach them. Because the war wasn't over. The Icarus vow had been a message, but a message needs an echo, a movement, and Kyle had no intention of dying in a coffin. Far away, the core worlds descended into paranoia. Security tightened, borders closed, recruitment surged, but none of it erased the fear that now sat in every admiral's spine, in every diplomat's forced smile. Humanity was back, and it didn't want peace. It wanted to settle the score. Ardent Hollow had never been on any official star maps. It was a scar of a planet, dry, wind-blasted, and forgotten. Once a mining colony under the old Terran Imperium, it had been abandoned after the collapse, left to rot in silence. The core deemed it worthless, uninhabitable, and that's exactly why it had become something else. A refuge, a lie, a resistance. Below its dead canyons and rusted mining rigs, far beneath the wind-swept crust, a network of bunkers hummed with quiet defiance. Power cells fed underground life support systems. Training rooms echoed with the grunts of men and women pushing their bodies to the edge. Maps covered the walls, hand-drawn, old-school, physical. This wasn't a rebel cell. It was something deeper. It was what remained. Her name was Irena, not a soldier, not in the traditional sense. She had no medals, no rank, but she had blood, Terran blood, and a mind honed by 20 years of hiding, watching and waiting. She stood over the cracked console in the war room, listening again to the signal they'd sent. "If you're hearing this, then the galaxy knows our name again." She clenched her fists. They had sent it on a gamble, a flare into the dark, hoping something, someone, was still out there. And something had answered. The tracker sat blinking red. A life pod, ancient in design, drifting in the void but aimed with unmistakable intent. Toward them. "It's real," she whispered. "It's really him." Behind her, an older man snorted. "Or it's bait, core psyop. You want to welcome death into our house?" "It's not core tech," she snapped. "You saw the encoding. No alien AI replicates Terran cipher keys that old. It's authentic." He folded his arms. "Then it's a relic. Maybe some desperate cryo-ghost with broken memories, not a leader." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "It's Kyle." That name had weight, even here, especially here. The children whispered it during training. The veterans wore it like a prayer. Kyle, the Revenant captain. The man who rode Icarus' vow into the rift and turned an entire fleet into dust. To the galaxy, he was terror. To them, he was prophecy. The old man didn't argue again. Irena issued the retrieval order. 3 fast runners prepped for launch. Covert, low energy, built from scavenged tech and old Imperium blueprints. Their mission? Reach the pod, verify the identity, and bring it home. As the ships tore through the upper atmosphere, breaking past the sandstorms, she turned back to the map. Ardent Hollow was small, but it wouldn't stay hidden forever. Not now. Not once Kyle arrived. They had days, maybe weeks, before core scanners picked up the shift in data traffic, the anomalies in drift patterns. But it was enough. Enough to prepare. Kyle had stopped keeping track of time, drifting through space in a dead pod stripped life down to basics. Breathe, wait, think. The AI fed him nutrient paste. He slept in short bursts. Sometimes he dreamed of Earth, not the real one, but the one he'd imagined during cryo. Untouched, unburned. He'd wake angry. Then the sensors picked up the ships. 3 vessels. Small, maneuverable, no weapons visible. Terran engine signatures. They didn't hail him. Just adjusted course, flanked the pod, and extended magnetic capture fields. He let them. If this was a trap, so be it. He'd die knowing someone had remembered. But when the pod docked and the hatch hissed open, he saw her. Irena. He didn't know her face, but he knew what it meant. She had the eyes of someone who'd lost family, the jaw of someone who didn't apologize for breathing, and the stance of a fighter who expected betrayal at every moment. "Captain Kyle?" she asked, voice steady. He stepped out, boots heavy on the ship's floor. "I was once." She nodded once. "We've been waiting for you." And he realized something then. He wasn't the last. He was the first. Back on Ardent Hollow, the return was near religious. Kyle walked through halls lined with human eyes, young, old, hardened, broken, burning. They didn't salute. They didn't cheer. They watched in silence, like witnesses to an eclipse. The legend was real, and he was here. He was given quarters, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he met with Irena and her circle. Old veterans, scientists, miners turned engineers, pilots, weapons techs. They weren't soldiers, not yet, but they would be. "Why now?" he asked her. "Why reach out after so long?" Irena showed him the data. The attack on the Grell Nexus, the destruction at Theta Prime, and most importantly, the black box fragments recovered from the Alcran Rift. They had proof of Icarus Vow's last stand, audio logs, combat footage, the explosion that turned fleets to vapor. "You scared them," she said. "You made the galaxy remember what it means to bleed." Kyle shook his head. They'll retaliate. They'll come looking." "I know," she replied. "That was a message, not a call to arms." She stepped closer. "But we heard it as one. And now they all will." Kyle stared at the screen. A flickering feed showed colonies lighting up in Terran-coded pings, silent beacons, like bones twitching back to life. "What are you building here?" Irena smiled grimly. "Not a rebellion, not a fleet. A funeral for the core." He chuckled darkly. "Then you're going to need better weapons. We've got a few surprises." She led him through the forges, deep caverns repurposed into weapons labs, old Imperium tech fused with scavenged alien parts, drones with stealth hulls, railguns powered by miniaturized fusion cores, cybernetic upgrades built from defunct battle AI. It wasn't a military. It was a resurrection. Kyle turned to her at the edge of the forge, the heat casting shadows across his scarred face. "You really think we can win?" Irena didn't blink. "Not in the way they think. We don't need planets or flags. We don't want thrones." She leaned in. "We want them to feel what they did to us, to walk their cities in fear, to know the stars are no longer safe." Kyle nodded slowly. It wasn't about rebuilding Earth. It was about burning memory into the bones of the galaxy. Then he looked up. "Then let's begin." And deep in the heart of Ardent Hollow, the last soldier of the old world became the first commander of the new one. The fire was lit. Training began before dawn. There were no sunrises on Ardent Hollow, just the constant whine of dust storms across the dead surface and the glow of power cores in the underground tunnels. But Kale woke early anyway. He didn't need light to remember what discipline looked like. The first group of recruits was raw. Farmers, salvagers, refugees. A few were the children of soldiers, orphans raised on old stories of Earth and the fall. They stood in line, weapons in hand, trembling with a mix of hope and fear. Kyle paced in front of them, scarred hands behind his back, voice cold. "You're not soldiers yet." They didn't answer. "You think you're ready to fight because you hate the core. That's not enough. Hate doesn't make you accurate. Hate doesn't make you fast. Hate gets you killed." Still, no one spoke. No one broke formation. Good, he thought. They're scared, but they're listening. "You want to wear that Terran crest?" he growled. "You want to carry the name we bled for? Then you earn it." He stepped aside and let Dre take over, grizzled, ruthless, and fluent in pain. The training began with hand-to-hand, then weapons drills, then combat simulations designed to break minds before bodies. Kyle didn't interfere. He watched. These weren't soldiers yet, but they would be monsters in time, because the only way to survive what was coming was to be worse than what they feared. Elsewhere in the galaxy, fear was spreading like a virus. In the inner rings of the Dolaris Empire, public broadcasts began censoring mention of Kale and Icarus Vow. Government channels downplayed the Alcran rift. Some officials even denied the explosion happened at all, but black market networks told a different story. Raw footage leaked. Burned ships drifting in dead space, comm chatter filled with screaming, and the last image from a fleeing cruiser's cam. A Terran warship glowing like a demon before detonation. People believed. And that belief did more damage than weapons. In the mid-systems, small riots broke out. Colonists refused to follow core taxation orders, citing Terran law, an obsolete, erased doctrine. In fringe planets, cargo captains painted old Imperium sigils on their hulls. It became a statement. We remember. The core responded with force. Entire settlements were razed, data terminals wiped, dissenters executed without trial, and still, the signal spread. Kale's name became a curse in core military circles. Pulling a Kale meant going rogue. Icarusing referred to suicidal last stands. The fact that he had survived the explosion was known only to a few, but even that uncertainty fed the myth, because nothing terrified the galaxy more than a dead man who refused to stay buried. Back on Ardent Hollow, Kale met with Irena and the Inner Circle. "We're not ready," one of the engineers said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We've tripled drone production and accelerated forge cycles, but if they hit us now—" "They won't," Kyle interrupted. Irena raised an eyebrow. "How can you be so sure?" Kyle tapped the screen showing core fleet movement. "They're paralyzed. Too many signals. Too many ghost sightings. They don't know if I'm alone, if there's another Icarus, if Earth's somehow rebuilding. They're hunting shadows." "But that won't last forever," she said. Which is why we need something bigger." She leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" Kyle pulled up an old data packet, encrypted, heavily aged. "Before the fall, we had a failsafe, not just the Vow. There were others, ghost fleets, hidden projects scattered across the black." Irena's eyes narrowed. "I've heard rumors. Deep space vaults, black site weapons." Kyle nodded. "We locate one, we raid it, and we show them the old war isn't over." It was risky. Most of the sites were probably wiped during the purge. But if even one remained— "Where's the closest possible cache?" she asked. Kale pointed to the map. "Cinder Halo, a derelict asteroid belt, abandoned by miners a century ago due to magnetic instability and frequent plasma storms, officially marked as uninhabitable." "Unofficially?" It had been a Terran testing ground. Irena nodded. "You take a team. In and out." Kyle didn't argue. He wanted to see it for himself. The transport ship slipped out of Ardent Hollow's gravity well with minimal noise. No transponders, no heat spikes, just old stealth protocols and quiet determination. Kyle flew with 5 others, Dry included, along with a weapons tech named Rika who'd once served as a saboteur in the outer colonies. The rest were ghosts in their own way, men and women without families, homes, or a future outside this war. The journey to Cinder Halo took 4 days. On approach, the asteroid belt loomed like jagged teeth, massive, irregular, spinning slowly under the faint pull of a dead star's gravity. Debris drifted like forgotten bones. Lightning storms flickered between rocks, lighting up the void in brief, violent flashes. They found the vault hidden in the largest asteroid, half-melted, cloaked, accessible only by a coded frequency Kyle had memorized before his cryo-sleep. They docked, entered, and stepped into a time capsule. The lights came on one by one, flickering red and blue, walls lined with cryopods, rows of sealed lockers, each marked with a name and rank, weapons covered in dust but still functional, and deeper, past biometric locks Kyle barely passed, was the heart. A prototype. It wasn't a warship. It was worse. A boarding drop pod the size of a bus, fitted with a portable grav core, stealth plating, and a fusion spike designed to breach capital ship hulls and explode from inside. Kyle stared at it like a man looking at his own grave. "This is what we used to make statements," he muttered. Rika was silent. Dry just whistled low. They loaded what they could. Cryosuits, drones, data cores, and the spike. When they returned to the ship, Kyle sent a single word back to Ardent Hollow. "Found." The core had begun its manhunt, but now the hunted had teeth, and the stars would soon burn with the memory of what they tried to forget. They called it the Ghost Spike. Originally designed for high-orbit planetary sieges, the Terran prototype had never been deployed in the war. It was considered unethical by the standards of the old Terran Imperium, a weapon that didn't kill armies but reputations. It didn't just breach ships. It erased symbols, turned floating emblems of power into silent tombs. And now, After centuries of exile, Kale held its activation key in his hand. The ghost spike sat cradled within the hold of the strike vessel Ash marked, a small war hauler retrofitted by Arena's engineers. It bore no insignia, no nameplate, just blackened hull plating that refused to reflect light, as if the void itself had claimed it. Kyle stood in the loading bay, armor sealed, visor down, helmet under his arm. Around him stood the team, Dry, Rika, and a half-dozen fresh Terran fighters who had survived Kyle's brutal training cycle. None of them asked questions. They didn't need to. The target had already been chosen. The Amaran Bastion, a mobile core command ship currently stationed in orbit over Larnax 4, a massive diplomatic and fleet control hub that handled communications for nearly half the mid-systems. Taking it would be suicide. Taking it with the ghost spike? Something worse, something unforgettable. The journey to Larnax 4 was cloaked in silence. They avoided major space lanes, skimmed black routes through mining dust clouds, and abandoned supply corridors. The Corps' attention was focused elsewhere, scanning fringe colonies, sending patrols into the rift, hunting ghosts where they had already been devoured. That gave Kyle the room he needed. As they neared the outer defense perimeter, Rika brought up the Bastion's telemetry. 600 meters long, 12 decks, 2 overlapping shield arcs. No docking lanes accessible without fleet credentials. Kyle nodded. So we won't dock. He turned to Dry. You ready to ride hell? Dry cracked his knuckles. Born for it. The ghost spike didn't launch like a ship. It fired like a shell. The ash-marked came to a full stop behind a passing asteroid and aligned the drop pod with silent magnetics. Kale stood inside the spike chamber, arms braced against the inner cage. The walls pulsed with kinetic charge. Lights turned blood red. The moment was quiet. He spoke into the helmet comms. Not to his crew, to the galaxy. If you're listening, this is your last warning. You forgot who we are. You erased our history. Now you're going to choke on it. Then he closed the visor, and the ghost spike launched. The impact was surgical. The spike ripped through the Bastion's outer shielding at 28,000 kilometers per hour, puncturing the upper bridge with zero warning. The magnetic clamps fired, anchoring it inside the ship's spinal corridor. Before the alarms even triggered, the internal core of the spike cracked open, and Kyle stepped out. His boots hit core flooring, sterile, clean, sanitized. He moved forward, rifle raised, visor scanning. 3 Corps officers stood frozen in the hallway, wide-eyed. Kale didn't hesitate. 3 shots, 3 bodies. Behind him, his team fanned out. The ghost spike wasn't designed for sustained warfare. It was meant to breach, kill, and detonate. But Kyle had no intention of dying today. Bridge is 50 meters forward, Dry barked. Multiple tangos incoming, heat signatures stacking. Push fast, Kale ordered. No delays. They moved like shadows. Not rebels, not insurgents. Soldiers. Terran soldiers. The Corps guards that met them were elite, trained in anti-boarding tactics, equipped with pulse rifles and smart armor. But they weren't ready. No one was. Kyle's team moved like ghosts, switching elevation, breaching doors before security protocols even activated. In under 3 minutes, they reached the inner sanctum of the Bastion's bridge, a command dome lined with panoramic displays and reinforced glass. Inside, 6 high command officers stared at Kyle like they were seeing a god crawl from hell. One reached for the alarm. Kyle shot him through the eye. Then he stepped forward and said a single word. Broadcast. Rika moved to the console and jacked in a hardware pulse. The ship's internal security froze. Comms opened. Kyle's voice filled every screen across Larnax 4, then every core station within range. This is Kale of Earth. You told the galaxy we were extinct. You called us monsters, but you forgot the truth." He pulled the ghost spike's final trigger, not the launcher, but the core fuse. Behind the team, the spike's charge began to glow. It wouldn't destroy the bastion. It would hollow it, a reverse grav-core collapse that would liquefy metal and shatter AI memory nodes. Not death. Disgrace. The bastion would remain in orbit, forever adrift, a monument to core failure. Kyle looked into the nearest camera and finished the message. This is just the beginning. Then they vanished into the blast. The strike team re-entered Ash marked via emergency beacons relayed seconds before detonation. The explosion did not boom. It folded. Space warped in a pulse of white-hot collapse. The bastion didn't explode outward. It caved inward. Decks curled like paper. Shield arcs flickered and died. Larnex 4 went silent. The core scrambled. Emergency comms lit up every channel. Battle fleets launched. High Command AI protocols initiated full lockdown procedures. But the damage was done. Millions had witnessed it. Kyle wasn't just alive. He was everywhere. Back on Ardent Hollow, the footage arrived minutes after the blast. Irena watched it in silence. Around her, commanders murmured. Recruits cheered. A few cried. She did none of that. She just stared at the replay of Kyle walking calmly through the bastion's bridge, his rifle slung like a relic, his eyes burning with something the core had tried to erase from the universe. Conviction. When the footage ended, she turned to her tech team. Push it to every pirate relay, every smuggler dock, every buried relay. But the core will let them. She stepped closer. They wanted to kill a symbol. Now they have a movement. In the Dolaris Senate, panic replaced arrogance. Meetings were called in the dead of night. Intelligence directors screamed about data leaks, fleet inadequacy, psychological breakdowns in core officers. "He's not a man," one admiral said. "He's a myth. You can't kill a myth." Across the core worlds, they enacted emergency protocols, martial law, mandatory screenings, mass arrests of suspected Terran sympathizers. But it was too late. You can kill a man. You can silence a voice. But once an idea burns, it becomes wildfire. Kale returned to Ardent Hollow in silence. His armor was scorched, his hands bloody. But he didn't limp, didn't speak. Irena met him at the dock. He removed his helmet and looked her in the eyes. "I told them. Now they'll listen." She nodded. "And now?" Kale turned, looked at the stars, those same stars that had turned their backs on Earth, that had watched in silence as humans were butchered and forgotten. His jaw tightened. "Now we make them bleed." They came in fleets, not patrols, not scouting parties, but full armadas, 47 warships, 16 battle cruisers, and over 100 support craft descending on Ardent Hollow like gods of vengeance. The Corps called it Operation Cleansing Light, an ironic name, because they were walking into the dark. Kyle stood at the edge of the underground command platform, surrounded by flickering monitors and the hum of 1,000 Terran fighters arming for war. The walls trembled from low orbital scans. The atmosphere above had already turned crimson from friction heat. Dropships would land in hours, maybe less. And Kale wasn't moving. He was waiting. Irena came up beside him, dressed in hardened body armor, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "They've already breached upper orbit. Drones are tracking inbound troop ships." Kyle nodded slowly. "How many?" "Too many. Not enough." She smiled, just barely. Across the base, the hangars roared to life. Engines screamed as repurposed mining ships rose into formation. Drones, salvaged and rebuilt, spun with deadly grace. Old-school Terran exosuits lined the walls, their pilots slipping inside one by one. The last Terrans weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing to erase the legacy of betrayal Kyle turned to the crowd that had gathered behind him. Young men and women, veterans, survivors, the broken, the exiled, the burned, and the damned. All of them wearing the old sigil on their chest, the Terran flame. Kyle didn't shout. He didn't give a speech. He spoke like a man already buried and clawing back from the grave. "This is the final hour," he said. "They thought wiping us out would erase the shame of what they did. But we're still here. We've bled, we've buried, we've suffered. But we've never forgotten." He looked out at the sea of faces. "We don't need to win. We don't need thrones. We just need to make them remember. Every step they take today will cost them blood. Every inch of our ground will scream with their failure. And if we fall," he lifted his rifle, "then we fall with our teeth in their throat." Silence. Then a low murmur. Then a roar. Not of hope, of vengeance. The Corps landed with arrogance. Drop cruisers carved into the sand, burning trenches into the desert above Ardent Hollow. Soldiers poured out, precision units with polished gear, visor-linked targeting systems, and AI command uplinks. They expected chaos. Instead, they walked into a trap. The first wave of Terran drones struck without sound, cloaked, silent, moving like shadows through the sandstorm that Arena's engineers had weaponized from the planet's own atmosphere. Explosions echoed through the dunes. The Corps lost 14 ships before they even touched ground. And when they did, they found mines. Dozens of them, shaped like old debris, detonating at pulse frequencies to bypass standard shielding. By the time Corps boots hit rock, Terran fighters were already in position. Every tunnel, every ledge, every forgotten shaft of the old mining network repurposed into kill zones. It wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Kyle fought like a man unchained. He led the southern flank, where the Corps had committed most of their heavy infantry, expecting a clean sweep. Instead, they met Kale's ambush, a collapsing corridor rigged to fold into fire, separating units and forcing them into bottlenecks where close-quarters combat neutralized their tech. He moved with his team through smoke and screams, pulse rifle in hand, knife at his side. One Corps soldier rounded a corner. Kyle slammed him into the wall, tore his helmet off, and drove a blade under his chin. Another came from behind. Dry took him out with a blast to the spine. They moved like phantoms, every inch soaked in the proof that Earth had birthed monsters, not martyrs. Irena held the central shaft, the main artery leading to Ardent Hollow's core. She didn't just defend it. She dared them to try and take it. Corps officers expected fragility, sentiment, maybe negotiation. What they got was sniper fire that punctured armor like paper, turrets rigged to fire shrapnel embedded with acid, and power lines rerouted to electrocute anyone stepping too deep. She watched one Corps captain scream as his entire squad melted into the walls. Then she turned to her comms officer. "Open the frequency." "What? They'll jam us?" Not a message. A recording she played it. Kale's broadcast from the Bastion, raw, uncut, his face glowing in the aftermath of the ghost spike. Across every open comm line the Corps was using for coordination, his voice bled through like a virus. "This is your warning. You forgot who we are. Now you remember." And across the battlefield, Corps soldiers hesitated. Because fear wasn't logical. Fear didn't care about numbers or command structures. Fear remembered. By the 7th hour, Corps Command knew the operation was failing. Not because of casualties, though they were massive, but because their troops were breaking. No matter how many reinforcements they sent, they were funneled, shredded, broken, and scattered by terrain they didn't understand, and people they thought no longer existed. One high command vessel issued an orbital strike order. Kyle intercepted the signal. He climbed a ladder half collapsed by cannon fire and reached the surface just as the targeting beams glowed red in the sky. He aimed and fired. The missile screamed upward, struck the cruiser mid-deployment. The sky cracked, and he was still standing. Not a myth, not a ghost, just Kyle. In the 12th hour, the Corps pulled back, not strategically. They fled. What had begun as Operation Cleansing Light became the Hollow Massacre in leaked Corps documents. Over 60% of the invasion force destroyed, dozens of captured officers. And worse? Broadcast footage of Terran fighters standing over Corps corpses, holding the flame of Earth high. The footage was everywhere in hours. Every broadcast relay, every pirate station, every slave market, every black site, every mining moon too small to care about the law. It didn't matter that Ardent Hollow was just one hole in the desert, because now it was a flag, a signal fire. And it had been lit with Corps blood. Kyle didn't celebrate. He sat alone in the central chamber, his rifle across his knees, his body sore, his arm wrapped in gauze. The base smelled of smoke and metal. Victory had weight, and it pressed on him like guilt. Irena sat beside him, blood on her cheek. "We won," she said. He looked at her, eyes hollow. "We made them remember. That's not the same thing." She was quiet for a while. Then, "They'll send more." "Yes. They'll burn more." "I know. Will we survive?" Kyle looked at the flame symbol still painted across the wall, the one they'd etched the night he returned, and he nodded. "No. But they won't survive us either." She smiled, slow and bitter. "That's good enough." The Corps never fully recovered. Their fleets began pulling back from outer territories. Entire systems fell into disarray as more colonies refused to obey. The myth of Terran extinction was shattered. New cells rose, not just on Ardent Hollow, but in hidden outposts, old vaults, abandoned cruisers. The resistance became something more, not a rebellion, not a government, a curse, a promise. Wherever power was used to erase the past, Terrans would rise to remind them. And Coyle? He never disappeared again. He led, not because he wanted to, but because no one else could carry that fire without turning to ash. He was the first blade drawn from the grave. And now, the galaxy would bleed.